A corrupt county sheriff targeted a lone black woman in a quiet roadside diner, assuming she was just an easy victim. He demanded her table, and when she didn't move fast enough, he raised his heavy hand to strike her across the face. He expected her to cower in fear. He expected everyone else to look away. But he didn't realize that the quiet man, watching from the corner, was an active-duty Navy SEAL with a highly trained combat dog. And he definitely didn't realize that the woman sitting alone was hiding a massive secret, one that would completely dismantle his entire corrupt empire in a matter of minutes. Before we dive in, let us know in the comments which country you are watching from, and if you love stories that melt your heart, please subscribe to support our channel. The neon sign outside the diner flickered with a low electrical buzz. It was a small building sitting off a dark stretch of highway in Georgia. The parking lot held only 3 cars and a large rig. Inside, the air smelled of stale coffee, fried onions, and old diner booths. The rain tapped lightly against the large glass windows. The front door opened. The small bell above the frame jingled. Marvin stepped inside. He stood 6 feet 2 inches tall. He wore faded jeans, dark boots, and a plain gray jacket. Nothing about his clothes stood out, but his posture revealed everything. He kept his shoulders back and his head up. His eyes immediately scanned the room. He noted the exits, the counter, the kitchen door, and the few people sitting in the booths. He was an active-duty Navy SEAL. Assessing a room was not a conscious choice. It was an automatic reflex. A large German shepherd walked right beside Marvin. The dog had a dark, thick coat and alert eyes. His name was Max. Max did not sniff the floor or pull on his leash. He moved with the same quiet discipline as his owner. Max was a trained military working dog. He stayed perfectly aligned with Marvin's left leg. Marvin walked to a booth in the far back corner. This spot gave him a clear view of the front door and the entire diner. He slid into the vinyl seat. Max immediately crawled under the table and lay down silently. A waitress walked over. Her name tag read, Clara. She looked tired, holding a stained notepad. Marvin ordered a black coffee, a steak, and a bowl of water for Max. He spoke in a low, polite voice. Clara nodded and walked back to the kitchen. Marvin settled into the booth. He let his eyes move across the room again. 2 truck drivers sat at the counter. They stared at their empty plates. An older man sat near the window, reading a newspaper. Then Marvin looked at the booth diagonally across from him. A black woman sat alone in the corner booth. She appeared to be in her early 40s. She wore a simple beige cardigan over a white blouse. Her glasses rested low on her nose. She did not look at her phone. She did not stare out the window. She was entirely focused on a thick stack of papers spread across her table. Marvin watched her for a moment. She ate a piece of pie with her left hand while her right hand held a yellow highlighter. She flipped a page, read down the column, and highlighted a specific paragraph. Her movements were precise. She carried a quiet authority. She did not look like someone passing through on a road trip. She looked like someone doing serious work in the only quiet place she could find. Clara returned with the coffee and the bowl of water. Marvin placed the bowl under the table. Max drank quietly. Marvin wrapped his hands around the warm coffee mug. He had been driving for 14 hours. He was moving across the state to report for a new training assignment. He needed this quiet stop. He liked the hum of the refrigerator. He liked the steady rhythm of the rain hitting the glass. He wanted to eat his meal, rest his eyes for 10 minutes, and get back on the road. For 20 minutes, the diner remained peaceful. The woman in the corner turned another page. The truck drivers paid their bill and left. The old man folded his newspaper. Marvin received his steak and began to eat. The food was hot and filling. Max rested his heavy head on Marvin's boot. Everything felt completely still. Then, the heavy sound of a vehicle engine cut through the rain. Headlights swept across the front windows, blindingly bright. The vehicle did not park properly in a designated spot. It pulled up directly in front of the main doors, its tires crushing the loose gravel. The red and blue lights of a police cruiser reflected off the wet pavement. Marvin stopped chewing. He looked out the window. 4 men stepped out of the cruiser, and a second car that pulled up behind it. They wore the khaki uniforms of the local county sheriff's department. The diner door flew open. The bell did not just jingle. It slammed against the glass. The 4 officers walked inside. They did not enter like men stopping for a cup of coffee. They entered like they owned the building. The man in the front was the sheriff. He had a thick build, a red face, and a silver star pinned to his chest. His heavy-duty belt jingled loudly with every step. He was laughing at something the officer behind him had said. The laugh was loud, harsh, and filled the entire room. The atmosphere inside the diner changed instantly. The quiet peace vanished. Clara stiffened behind the counter. She quickly grabbed a rag and started wiping down a perfectly clean surface, avoiding eye contact. The old man by the window lowered his head and kept his eyes on the table. Marvin did not move. He kept his hands above the table. He watched the sheriff. He watched the deputies spread out behind him. They walked with arrogant swagger. They took up too much space. They wanted everyone to look at them, but they also wanted everyone to fear them. Under the table, Max shifted. The dog did not bark, but Marvin felt the subtle change in Max's posture. Max's muscles tensed. His ears rotated forward. The dog sensed the sudden shift in the room's energy. Marvin placed his fork down. He took a slow sip of his black coffee. His eyes darted to the corner booth. The woman had not flinched. She did not look up at the loud men. She simply turned another page of her document and continued to read. The sheriff stopped near the entrance. He placed his hands on his hips and scanned the room. His eyes passed over the empty booths. Then his gaze locked onto the back corner. He stared directly at the booth where the black woman sat alone. A smug, ugly smile formed on his face. Marvin felt his heart rate steady. His training kicked in. The quiet stop was over. Trouble had just walked through the door. The diner grew utterly silent. The only sounds were the rain against the glass and the heavy footsteps of the 4 men. The sheriff took the lead. He walked with a wide stance. His boots struck the linoleum floor hard. He did not look for an open table. The diner had plenty of empty booths near the front. He ignored them completely. His eyes remained fixed on the back corner. Clara, the waitress, stood frozen behind the counter. Her hands gripped a white ceramic coffee mug so tightly her knuckles turned white. She kept her head down. She did not offer them menus. She did not ask if they wanted coffee. Her fear was palpable. It hung in the air like thick smoke. Marvin noticed her reaction immediately. A waitress in a small-town diner usually knew the local law enforcement. They usually exchanged small talk or jokes. Clara's terror told Marvin everything he needed to know about this sheriff. This man did not protect this town. He ruled it through intimidation. 3 deputies trailed closely behind the sheriff. They mirrored his arrogant walk. One deputy, a younger man with closely cropped blonde hair and a nervous twitch in his jaw, rested his hand lazily on his duty belt. His name plate read Miller. The other 2 were older, heavy-set, and looked bored. They fanned out slightly as they moved deeper into the diner. They instinctively blocked the main aisle. It was a basic intimidation tactic. They wanted to trap their target in the corner. Marvin tracked their movements without turning his head. He used the reflection in the dark window beside him. He noted their weapons. Standard issue, sidearms. He noted their physical condition. None of them looked particularly fast or fit. The sheriff carried extra weight around his middle. But they had numbers, and they had badges. In a small town, a badge often acted as a shield for bad behavior. Under the booth, Max let out a low, barely audible exhale. He did not growl. He did not move his paws, but his body went rigid. The dog's training taught him to recognize aggression. He felt the sudden spike of adrenaline in the room. Marvin reached down slowly and rested his fingers gently on Max's neck. The physical contact was a silent command. "Wait. Hold position." Max relaxed slightly but kept his eyes locked on the approaching boots. The sheriff reached the back half of the diner. The two truck drivers at the counter suddenly stood up. They did not finish their coffee. They threw a few crumpled dollar bills on the counter and walked quickly toward the exit. They kept their eyes glued to the floor. They did not want to look at the sheriff. They just wanted to leave before the trouble started. The door closed behind them, leaving the diner feeling even smaller and more trapped. The sheriff finally stopped. He stood directly in front of the corner booth. He loomed over the black woman. She had not moved. She kept her head tilted downward. She continued to read the document in front of her. Her yellow highlighter hovered over a paragraph. She acted as if the large, armed man blocking her light simply did not exist. This reaction clearly annoyed him. He expected fear. He expected her to scramble to gather her things. He expected submission. Instead, he received complete indifference. The sheriff leaned forward. He placed both of his large, meaty hands on the edge of her table. He leaned his weight onto his arms. He invaded her personal space deliberately. His face was only a few feet from hers. He smelled of stale tobacco and cheap cologne. He raised his right hand and tapped his thick index finger against the wooden tabletop. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was sharp and demanding. It echoed in the quiet diner. The woman did not look up. She finished highlighting her sentence. She capped the highlighter with a soft click. She placed the pen down beside her plate. Her movements remained slow, deliberate, and entirely calm. "You must be lost," the sheriff said. His voice was loud, booming, and thick with a southern drawl. He did not speak to ask a question. He spoke to announce his presence. "This here is my town, and this booth is my booth. We sit here every Thursday night. You are sitting in my seat." He lied. Marvin knew he lied. Several booths near the window offered better views and more space. The sheriff chose this corner specifically because someone else was already occupying it. He chose it because the person occupying it was a black woman sitting entirely alone. He saw an easy target for his nightly entertainment. Deputy Miller snickered behind him. The other two deputies crossed their arms, smirking. They waited for the show to begin. They enjoyed watching their boss break people down. Marvin shifted his weight slightly on the vinyl seat. His right hand moved off his coffee mug. He rested it flat on his thigh, inches from his hip. His eyes remained fixed on the reflection in the window. He calculated the distance. 10 feet. 3 long strides. If the sheriff drew his weapon, Marvin knew exactly how to close that gap before the man could pull the trigger. The sheriff tapped his finger on the table again, harder this time. The water in the woman's glass rippled. "I said," the sheriff repeated, raising his voice so the whole diner could hear. "You are in my seat. Pack up your little papers and find somewhere else to sit. Or better yet, find another town to eat in. We don't like your kind causing trouble around here." The threat was no longer subtle. It was direct and ugly. The air in the diner grew colder. Clara closed her eyes behind the counter, silently praying for the woman to just get up and leave. Marvin took a slow, deep breath, his muscles coiling like a spring, waiting for the woman's next move. The sheriff stood over the woman. He expected her to apologize. He expected her to scramble out of the booth and run out the front door into the rain. He waited for the fear to take over her face. He wanted to see her hands shake. It did not happen. The black woman slowly removed her reading glasses. She folded the earpieces together with a soft click and placed them neatly beside her yellow highlighter. She looked up at the large man looming over her. Her expression remained completely neutral. She did not shrink back into the vinyl seat. She sat up a little straighter. "I believe there are plenty of open tables in the front of the restaurant," she said. Her voice was smooth, educated, and entirely devoid of panic. She spoke with the clear articulation of someone who was used to being heard. Sheriff Hodges blinked. The muscles in his jaw tightened. He was a man accustomed to immediate, unquestioning obedience. The polite refusal caught him completely off guard. A heavy silence fell over the diner. Even the rain hitting the window seemed to quiet down. Deputy Miller, the younger officer with the blonde hair, chuckled from behind the sheriff. He rested his hand heavily on the butt of his holstered weapon. He puffed out his chest, trying to mirror his boss. "I do not think you heard the sheriff, lady. He said this is his table. You need to clear out." The woman shifted her gaze to Miller for a fraction of a second. She did not look at his gun. She looked directly into his eyes, dismissing him instantly. Then she looked back at Hodges. "I heard him perfectly well," she replied. "However, I arrived here 30 minutes ago. I ordered my meal. The waitress just brought it to me. I am currently eating. I am not leaving this booth until I am finished with my dinner and my work." She reached for her white cloth napkin, unfolded it calmly, and placed it across her lap. She picked up her fork. She took a small, deliberate bite of her pie. She chewed slowly. Hodges stared at her. His face turned a shade of deep crimson. The veins in his thick neck began to bulge against his tight uniform collar. He was the law in this county. He dictated who sat where, who spoke when, and who stayed in town. A lone woman challenging his authority in front of his own deputies and the local diner staff was an unacceptable insult. He felt his authority slipping, and he only knew one way to get it back. Marvin watched the interaction from his corner booth. He did not move his head. He used only his peripheral vision and the dark reflection in the window pane. He noticed the sheriff clenching his large fists. The man lacked tactical discipline. He operated purely on fragile ego and hot anger. Those traits made him highly predictable, but they also made him very dangerous to unarmed civilians. Under the table, Max let out a very low, almost silent rumble deep in his chest. The dog felt the hostility radiating across the room. Marvin pressed the side of his heavy leather boot gently against the dog's ribcage. The steady pressure told Max to hold his position. The situation was escalating rapidly, but it had not crossed the legal line into physical violence yet. Marvin needed to wait. Intervening too early could trigger a chaotic gunfight in a tight, enclosed space with civilians present. Intervening too late could get the woman seriously hurt. He measured his breathing. He inhaled slowly for 4 seconds. He held the air in his lungs for 4 seconds. He exhaled smoothly for 4 seconds. Clara stood frozen by the coffee pots near the kitchen door. She looked absolutely terrified. She wanted to yell at the woman to just apologize and move. She knew Hodges. She had seen him drag people out of their cars on the highway for a broken taillight. She knew he had hurt people for far less than talking back, but she kept her mouth shut and prayed it would end quickly. Hodges leaned closer to the woman. He placed both hands flat on the table, trapping her inside the booth. He blocked her only exit. "You do not seem to understand how things work around here," Hodges said. His voice dropped an octave, turning into a gravelly, menacing growl. "You are not a citizen with rights right now. You are a trespasser sitting in my seat. I am giving you one last chance to gather your little papers and walk out that door. If you do not, I will drag you out of this diner by your hair and lock you in a concrete cell for resisting arrest. Do you understand me now?" The woman swallowed her food. She did not blink. She looked him directly in the eyes, matching his intense stare. "I understand that you are attempting to intimidate me," she replied firmly. "I also understand that you have no legal grounds to ask me to move, let alone arrest me. I am a paying customer in a public establishment. You are disturbing my peace. If you touch me, you will be committing a severe offense." She picked up her pen and tapped it twice on her document. "Now, please step back. You are blocking my light." The deputies behind Hodges stopped smiling. Miller took his hand off his belt and took a half step backward. The diner went dead silent. The words hung in the air, sharp and clear. She did not raise her voice, but she commanded the entire room. She spoke to him like a disappointed teacher speaking to a misbehaving child. Hodges snapped. His inflated ego could not handle the public humiliation. He slammed his right fist down on the center of the wooden table with all of his weight. The impact sounded like a gunshot. The coffee cup jumped. The glass of ice water tipped over, spilling cold liquid directly across her stack of important documents. The yellow highlighter rolled off the edge of the table and hit the linoleum floor. "Listen to me, you arrogant piece of trash," Hodges yelled. Spit flew from his mouth and landed on the table. "I am the law in this county. I decide what is legal. I decide who stays and who goes." He reached out aggressively and grabbed the front of her beige cardigan. He bunched the soft fabric in his thick fist and yanked her violently forward. The woman gasped, finally showing a flash of genuine shock as she was pulled across the table. Her glasses slid off the wood, her files scattered everywhere. Marvin's eyes narrowed. The line had just been crossed. He did not stand up yet. He watched the sheriff's other hand. Hodges pulled the woman closer, his face twisted in pure, unhinged rage. He raised his left hand high in the air, his palm open and his thick fingers spread wide. He intended to strike her across the face with all of his strength. He intended to cause serious physical harm. The three deputies stepped back, giving their boss room to swing. Clara let out a short, terrified scream and covered her face. Marvin uncoiled his legs. He slid out of his booth. He moved without making a single sound. He did not rush or stumble. He moved with the terrifying, lethal speed of a man who had trained for a decade to eliminate armed threats in close quarters. Max scrambled out from under the table instantly, his teeth bared, matching his handler's exact speed. The quiet stop had just turned into a battlefield. Hodges kept his heavy fist wrapped around the bunched fabric of her beige cardigan. He leaned his weight forward, pressing her back against the vinyl booth. The physical contact was sudden and violent. It was designed to break her composure. It was designed to make her beg. The woman did not panic. She did not scream for the waitress. She did not look at the other deputies. She looked down at his thick knuckles resting against her collarbone. Then she raised her eyes and met his furious stare. "Remove your hand," she commanded. Her voice lacked fear. It lacked the high pitch of panic. It carried a cold, absolute authority that seemed completely out of place in a roadside diner. Hodges let out a breathless, ugly laugh. He tightened his grip on her clothing, twisting the fabric slightly. "Or what?" Hodges mocked. His breath smelled stale and bitter. "You think someone in here is going to help you? You think that waitress is going to dial the phone? I am the law in this town. I make the calls." She did not look at Clara hiding behind the counter. She kept her focus entirely on the man assaulting her. "You are wearing a uniform," she said. Her words were sharp and precisely articulated. "You took an oath to uphold the Constitution and protect the citizens of this county. Instead, you use a taxpayer-funded badge to bully people trying to eat their dinner. You do not enforce the law. You break it because you assume no one with authority is watching." The words hit the air like physical blows. Deputy Miller shifted his weight uncomfortably behind his boss. The other two deputies remained silent, exchanging a quick, uncertain glance. They were accustomed to people crying. They were accustomed to people apologizing profusely. They were entirely unprepared for a civilian delivering a legal lecture while being physically restrained. "You are violating my civil rights," the woman continued. Her voice cut through the quiet room, carrying over the sound of the rain hitting the window pane. "You are committing criminal assault. Every single second you keep your hand on my person, you add another severe charge to your inevitable indictment. I strongly suggest you let go." From his corner booth, Marvin watched the entire exchange. His body was perfectly still, but his muscles were tightly coiled. He breathed in a slow, measured rhythm. Inhale for 4 seconds. Hold for 4 seconds. Exhale for 4 seconds. He evaluated the threat level in the room. He noted the exact positions of the three deputies. Miller stood closest, his right hand hovering nervously near his holster. He had not drawn the weapon, but his body language showed extreme stress. The other two deputies stood slightly further back, blocking the main aisle. They looked relaxed but attentive. Max stood rigidly beside Marvin's leg. The German shepherd did not bark. He did not growl. He let out a low, steady vibration deep in his throat. It was a warning sound that only his handler could feel. Max tracked the sheriff's movements with predatory focus. The dog understood violence. He waited only for the command to strike. Marvin calculated the distance. 10 feet, 3 long strides. He mapped out his angle of approach. He needed to neutralize the sheriff without triggering a chaotic gunfight. A shootout in an enclosed diner with civilians present was the worst possible outcome. He needed precision and overwhelming speed. At the corner booth, Hodges felt the eyes of his deputies burning into his back. He felt Clara watching from the kitchen door. He felt the old man staring from the window seat. The woman's calm, articulate words stripped away his power. She exposed him as a common thug, wearing a cheap piece of metal on his chest. His face flushed a darker shade of crimson. The veins on his forehead pulsed visibly under the harsh fluorescent lights. He could not form a logical argument. He lacked the intellect to debate her on the law and the maturity to simply walk away. His fragile ego could not process this level of public defeat. "You think you are smarter than me?" Hodges spat. Anger contorted his features. "You come into my town, take up my table, and talk to me like I am some rookie patrolman?" "I am talking to you like you are a criminal," she replied flatly. "Because right now, that is exactly what you are." That sentence was the final spark. The tiny thread holding his violent temper together snapped completely. Hodges shoved her backward hard. He released her cardigan, sending her crashing against the back of the vinyl booth. She hit the seat with a dull thud, her breath catching slightly in her throat. Before she could sit forward, Hodges took a half-step back to create space. He planted his heavy boots firmly on the wet linoleum floor. He needed leverage. He wanted to cause maximum damage. He raised his massive right hand high into the air. He curled his fingers back, exposing his thick palm. He aimed directly for the side of her face. He put his shoulder and his hips into the movement, intending to deliver a devastating strike that would break her jaw and knock her unconscious. The diner froze in horror. Clara covered her mouth with both hands to stifle a scream. Deputy Miller tensed his shoulders. The old man by the window dropped his newspaper. The heavy hand began its downward arc. The trajectory was fast, brutal, and completely without mercy. Marvin launched himself forward. The heavy hand began its downward arc. The trajectory was fast and brutal. Sheriff Hodges intended to cause maximum damage. He wanted to hear the crack of bone. He wanted to see the woman fall. Marvin launched himself forward. He did not yell. He did not issue a warning. He did not look around to see if anyone else was going to help. He moved with the terrifying, lethal speed of a man who had spent the last 10 years training for close-quarters combat. He covered the 10 feet in 3 massive strides. His dark boots barely made a sound on the wet linoleum floor. He bypassed the empty tables. He slid right past Deputy Miller before the younger man even realized someone else was moving in the room. Sheriff Hodges put his entire upper body weight into the strike. His hand was inches away from the woman's cheek when something stopped him. The abrupt halt sent a massive shockwave up his thick arm. It felt exactly like his wrist had just struck a solid steel beam. Hodges blinked in confusion. His hand hung suspended in the air. He could not move it forward. He could not pull it back. The kinetic energy of his strike disappeared instantly. Marvin stood directly beside the sheriff. His right hand was clamped tightly around Hodges' thick wrist. Marvin did not look angry. His face was entirely devoid of emotion. His eyes were cold, calculated, and intensely focused on the threat. The grip was absolute. Marvin applied pressure exactly where the bones and tendons met. The human wrist is a complex joint, and Marvin knew exactly how to dismantle it. The intense pain registered in Hodges' brain a split second later. Hodges gasped loudly. The dark red flush on his face drained away. replaced by a sudden, sickening pale color. He tried to yank his arm back. He used his heavy shoulder muscles. He twisted his thick torso. It did not work at all. The man holding him was built like a machine. Marvin simply adjusted his stance, lowering his center of gravity. He locked his elbow and twisted his own wrist just a fraction of an inch. A sharp, audible pop echoed in the quiet diner. Hodges let out a high, strained noise. His knees buckled slightly under his own weight. "Let go of him right now," Deputy Miller shouted. The young officer finally snapped out of his shock. He took a sudden step forward. His right hand slapped down onto his leather duty belt. He unsnapped the holster. He grabbed the handle of his service weapon. The other two deputies reacted to Miller's panic. They reached for their own guns. The situation was spiraling out of control rapidly. 3 armed, poorly trained men were about to draw weapons in a small room full of innocent civilians. A dark blur shot across the diner floor. Max did not run like a normal pet chasing a ball. The German Shepherd moved like a guided missile. He cleared the space between the corner booth and the deputies in a fraction of a second. He did not jump at Miller. He did not try to bite. He executed a perfect tactical block. Max planted his heavy paws directly in front of Miller. He placed his body squarely between the armed deputies and the black woman in the booth. Max lowered his large head. He pulled his black lips back, exposing rows of large, sharp teeth. He let out a vicious, guttural snarl. The sound did not come from his throat. It came from deep inside his chest. It was the raw, primal sound of a dangerous predator ready to tear flesh. The dog weighed 90 pounds, consisting entirely of dense muscle and intense combat training. He stared directly at Miller's hand resting on the gun. The message was unmistakable. If Miller pulled that weapon out of the leather holster, Max would rip his arm apart before the barrel could even point forward. Miller froze completely. His fingers remained wrapped tightly around the grip of his gun, but he did not pull it. His eyes widened in absolute terror as he stared down at the massive, furious dog. The other two deputies stopped moving immediately. They raised their empty hands slowly, stepping carefully away from their own holsters. They had seen police K-9 units before, but this was entirely different. This dog did not look like he was waiting for a verbal command from a handler. He looked like he was begging them to make a mistake. Marvin did not look at the deputies. He knew Max had the perimeter secured. He trusted his dog implicitly. Marvin kept his eyes locked firmly on Sheriff Hodges. He applied another millimeter of pressure to the captured wrist. Hodges groaned loudly, sinking lower toward the wet floor to alleviate the agonizing pain radiating through his arm. The arrogant, booming voice was completely gone. The local bully was broken. "Tell your men to step back," Marvin said. His voice was incredibly low and calm. It cut through the thick tension in the room like a sharp razor. Hodges squeezed his eyes shut. Heavy sweat beaded on his forehead. "Miller," he choked out. His voice was weak, barely a whisper. "Miller, back off right now. Hands away from the gun. Do it now." Miller instantly released the handle of his weapon. He raised both hands high in the air and took 2 large, cautious steps backward. The other 2 deputies mirrored his exact movement. They pressed their backs against the wooden trim of the empty booths, trying to put as much space as possible between themselves and the snarling German Shepherd. The diner remained completely frozen. Clara stood trapped behind the counter, trembling violently as she clutched a dirty rag. The old man by the window held his breath, too scared to even slide out of his seat. Max kept his aggressive position, his sharp eyes darting between the 3 deputies, his low growl filling the silence. Marvin maintained his crushing grip on the sheriff. He had neutralized the immediate physical threat perfectly. He had built an unbreakable steel wall between the corrupt officers and the woman in the booth. The black woman sat up straight. She reached across the wooden table, picked up her reading glasses, and placed them calmly back on her face. She looked directly at Marvin. Then she looked down at the sheriff, who was now kneeling on the wet linoleum floor, completely immobilized by a quiet stranger he did not even know. The diner floor felt cold and wet beneath Sheriff Hodges. The sharp, shooting pain in his right wrist completely scrambled his thoughts. He breathed in short, rapid gasps. The large man standing over him did not shout. He did not issue frantic commands. Marvin simply held the wrist at an impossible angle. The silence from the stranger terrified Hodges more than any threat could. "You have no idea what you just did," Hodges groaned. He tried to project authority, but his voice cracked in the middle of the sentence. Sweat dripped down his red face and splashed onto the linoleum. "You assaulted a sworn officer of the law. You are going to rot in a federal penitentiary for the rest of your miserable life." Marvin did not react to the empty threat. He looked down at the man kneeling on the floor. "You are not acting as an officer of the law," Marvin replied smoothly. His voice carried no anger. It sounded clinical and detached. "You attempted to strike an unarmed civilian. I intervened to prevent serious bodily harm. If you continue to resist, the joint will separate completely. The choice is yours." To prove his point, Marvin shifted his weight backward just half an inch. The leverage pulled hard on Hodges' tendons. The sheriff let out a high, agonizing squeal. His left hand clawed at the wet floor, desperately trying to find traction. He surrendered immediately, letting his heavy body go entirely limp to relieve the excruciating pressure. Across the aisle, the standoff continued. Deputy Miller stood perfectly still. His hands remained raised near his shoulders. He could not tear his eyes away from the German Shepherd. Max maintained his tactical block. The dog did not relax his posture. He kept his center of gravity low, ready to spring forward. A thick string of saliva dripped from his exposed fangs. A low, vibrating growl hummed continuously deep in the dog's chest. "Boss," Miller whispered. His voice shook uncontrollably. "Boss, what do we do? That dog is going to kill me." "Do nothing," Hodges managed to spit out between gritted teeth. The pain completely clouded his vision. "Just stay put!" The other two deputies pressed their backs flat against the wooden diner booths. They looked at Marvin, then at the massive dog, and finally at their defeated boss on the floor. The power dynamic in the room had flipped entirely in less than 10 seconds. The badge no longer provided them with absolute control. They were outmatched tactically, physically, and psychologically. They lacked the training to handle a real organized threat. They only knew how to intimidate people who could not fight back. Clara, the waitress, peeked out from the kitchen doorway. She kept her hands clamped firmly over her mouth. She could not believe what she was seeing. Sheriff Hodges, the man who terrorized the small town for a decade, was currently kneeling in a puddle of spilled water, completely neutralized by a quiet man drinking black coffee. The old man by the window slowly picked up his newspaper, using it as a paper shield to hide his face while he watched the incredible scene unfold. The black woman in the corner booth finally moved. She did not scramble out in a panic. She did not act like a rescued victim. She moved with deliberate, calculated precision. She reached across the wooden table and picked up her reading glasses. She slid them onto her face, adjusting the frame carefully. Then she looked down at the ruined stack of documents. The spilled ice water had soaked the paper, blurring her yellow highlights. She let out a soft sigh of annoyance. It was not a sound of fear. It was the sound of someone whose serious work had been inconveniently interrupted by a child. She placed both hands flat on the dry edges of the table and pushed herself up. She stood to her full height. The beige cardigan no longer looked like simple, casual wear. The way she carried her shoulders transformed her entire presence. She looked down at Sheriff Hodges. The neutral, polite expression she wore earlier vanished completely. A cold, piercing authority replaced it. "You told me I was not a citizen with rights," the woman said. Her voice rang out clearly in the silent diner. She stepped out from behind the booth, walking right past the shattered glass and the spilled water. She stopped exactly 2 feet away from the kneeling sheriff. Hodges looked up at her. His eyes were wide, with a mixture of physical pain and sudden, creeping dread. The man holding his wrist felt like a machine, but the woman standing in front of him felt like an executioner. "You told me you decide what is legal in this county," she continued, her tone dropping into a deadly serious register. "You told me you decide who stays and who goes. You assumed my silence was weakness. You assumed my patience was fear." Miller swallowed hard. The other two deputies did not dare to move a single muscle. Max let out another low rumble, ensuring they stayed securely pinned against the wall. "Who are you?" Hodges gasped. His loud bravado was entirely gone. He finally realized he had made a catastrophic error. The woman did not answer immediately. She reached her right hand inside the inner pocket of her beige cardigan. The movement was slow and deliberate. The deputies tensed slightly, but they did not reach for their weapons. The German shepherd's warning growl escalated, locking them securely in place. Marvin watched her hand closely. He recognized the confident, deliberate movement. She was not reaching for a weapon. She was reaching for something far more powerful. In this specific situation, she pulled her hand out of the pocket. Her fingers firmly gripped a small, dark leather case. She held it up, pausing for a single second. Then, with a swift flick of her wrist, she flipped the leather case open and held it directly in front of the sheriff's sweating face. The diner lights caught the reflection of a heavy, solid gold badge. It was not a standard county star. It was an intricate shield, surrounded by dark lettering that carried the undeniable weight of the federal government. Hodges stopped breathing. His eyes locked onto the gold shield. The color drained from his face completely, leaving him looking like a ghost. The solid gold shield gleamed under the harsh, flickering fluorescent lights of the roadside diner. It hung suspended in the air, held firmly by the steady hand of the woman sitting in the corner booth. The air in the room grew entirely still. The only sound left was the heavy, rhythmic drumming of the rain against the large front windows. Sheriff Hodges stopped breathing. His wide, bloodshot eyes remained completely locked on the intricate design and the thick, black lettering engraved into the metal. His brain, clouded by years of unchecked power and sudden physical pain, struggled violently to process the image. The badge did not say County Police. It did not say State Trooper. It read, United States Federal Judge. "My name is Eleanor Vance," the woman said. Her voice offered no sympathy. It carried no fear. It held the absolute, cold authority of a federal courtroom. She did not raise her tone, yet every single syllable commanded total silence. "I am the newly appointed federal judge for this district. I took my oath of office exactly 2 weeks ago. And you, Sheriff Hodges, are the primary subject of my very first sealed indictment." Hodges trembled. His large, heavy frame shook visibly under his khaki uniform. The sharp, burning pain in his twisted right wrist suddenly felt completely insignificant. Marvin maintained his iron grip, not letting the sheriff move a single inch, but Marvin felt the fight drain out of the man instantly. A deep, suffocating dread consumed Hodges. He looked up at Judge Vance, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He tried to speak. He tried to form a coherent sentence, an excuse, an apology, but his throat seized in pure shock. No words came out. "You operated a highly organized, corrupt extortion ring in this county for 5 years. Judge Vance continued. She spoke slowly and clearly, ensuring every single word echoed across the quiet, tense room. She maintained direct eye contact, piercing through his fragile, broken ego. "You targeted minority travelers on the highway. You fabricated traffic stops. You seized cash and property without legal justification. You harassed local business owners who refused to pay for your so-called protection. You intimidated anyone who dared to question your authority. You thought your local badge made you a king. You thought you were completely untouchable." Deputy Miller, still pressed firmly against the wooden trim of the nearby booth, let out a pathetic, shaky whimper. The young deputy suddenly understood the massive scale of their mistake. His eyes darted toward the exit, but he did not dare to move. Max, the massive German shepherd, let out another low, rumbling growl. The highly trained military dog maintained his strict tactical block. Max stood tall and rigid, his ears pinned forward, his sharp teeth slightly bared. He ensured the 3 terrified deputies did not shift a single inch. Marvin stood perfectly still. He kept his grip secure. He did not show any surprise at the massive revelation. His training taught him to assess and adapt to new variables instantly. He simply watched the judge dismantle the arrogant bully with words alone. Marvin noted the precise posture of Judge Vance. She sat straight, her shoulders pulled back, completely unbothered by the violence that had nearly struck her face seconds ago. She was a woman who possessed real power, the kind of power that did not require shouting or physical force. The Department of Justice spent 8 months building a watertight case against you and your department, Judge Vance stated. She reached her free hand back into her beige cardigan pocket. We gathered financial records, witness testimonies, and physical evidence. But we needed one final element. We needed to catch you in the act of violating civil rights without the protection of your local jurisdiction. She pulled her hand out of her pocket. She held up a small black rectangular device made of hard plastic. A tiny red light blinked rapidly on its smooth surface, flashing steadily in the dim diner light. This is a federal panic button and GPS locator, Vance explained. She held it high so the kneeling sheriff could see it clearly. It also contains a highly sensitive microphone. It transmits a live, encrypted audio feed directly to a mobile command center operated by the Department of Justice. I activated it the exact moment you approached my table and demanded my seat. You walked completely blind into a federal sting operation. Hodges slumped lower toward the wet, dirty linoleum floor. His heavy shoulders dropped. The horrific realization crushed his remaining pride completely. The FBI had listened to every single second of the interaction. They heard him threaten a citizen. They heard him use his authority to bully a lone woman. They heard him order his deputies to clear the diner. By raising your hand against me, you made the biggest mistake of your life, Vance stated coldly. She placed the black device on the table next to her scattered documents. You just escalated a massive racketeering and corruption case into the attempted physical assault of a federal judge. Your career is over, Sheriff Hodges. Your freedom is gone. You will never wear a badge again, and you will spend a very long time inside a federal penitentiary. The silence stretched again, heavier than before. Even the old man hiding in the back booth held his breath. Clara, the terrified waitress, stared from behind the counter, realizing she had just witnessed the complete destruction of the town's biggest nightmare. Then, in the far distance, a faint sound pierced the heavy rain outside. It started as a low hum, then grew into a high, rising wail. Sirens. It was not just one local police siren. It was a chorus of deep, powerful federal sirens. The sound multiplied rapidly, echoing loudly down the dark, empty Georgia highway. The sirens grew closer and closer by the second, tearing through the quiet night. Sheriff Hodges closed his eyes. A single tear of pure defeat rolled down his red, flushed cheek. He did not try to struggle against Marvin's grip. He accepted his fate. The trap had officially snapped shut, and there was absolutely no way out. The heavy glass doors of the diner swung open with violent force. 6 federal agents flooded into the room. They moved with absolute precision and speed. Dark tactical gear covered their bodies from head to toe. Bright yellow letters reading FBI stood out clearly across their chests and backs. They held compact rifles, keeping the muzzles pointed downward but completely ready for any sudden movement. The loud wail of the sirens outside masked the sound of their heavy boots on the wet linoleum floor. They swept the entire room in seconds. They identified every person, every potential threat, and every exit. Special Agent Harris led the tactical team. He was a tall, lean man with short silver hair and sharp, analytical eyes. He lowered his weapon slightly. He took in the bizarre scene unfolding before him. 3 local county deputies cowered against a wooden diner booth, pinned completely in place by a massive, snarling German shepherd. On the floor, the formidable county sheriff kneeled in pure agony, trapped by the iron grip of a quiet, muscular man in a gray jacket. And in the corner booth, Judge Eleanor Vance sat perfectly calm, surrounded by scattered legal documents and a blinking recording device. Harris stepped forward. He kept his posture relaxed but highly alert. "Judge Vance, we received the emergency signal," Harris said loudly. His voice carried well over the noise of the heavy rain and the blaring sirens outside. "Are you secure?" "I am entirely secure, Agent Harris," Vance replied. She adjusted her elegant reading glasses and stood up slowly. She smoothed the wrinkles from her beige cardigan. "The situation is under control. Please take Sheriff Hodges and his deputies into custody immediately. Add federal assault and attempted battery of a federal officer to their existing racketeering and extortion charges." Harris nodded once. He gave a swift, silent hand signal to his tactical team. 2 agents moved quickly toward the terrified deputies. "Keep your hands visible," one agent ordered firmly. The deputies did not resist at all. They knew their reign of terror had ended permanently. They slowly lowered their hands and turned around to face the wall. The federal agents secured their wrists with heavy steel handcuffs. The sharp metallic clicks echoed loudly across the quiet diner, cutting through the remaining tension in the room. Harris then approached Marvin. He looked down at Max. The dog maintained his aggressive stance, but he did not lunge. Max sensed the shift in the dynamic of the room. He recognized the heavily armed agents as authority figures, not active threats. Max looked up at Marvin, waiting patiently for a new command. "You can release him now," Harris told Marvin. He offered a respectful nod, instantly recognizing the posture of a fellow military operator. "We will take it from here. Thank you for securing the primary suspect." Marvin did not say a word immediately. He looked down at Hodges, then released his tight grip on the sheriff's swollen right wrist. Marvin stepped back smoothly, creating space for the agents to work. "Heel, Max," Marvin commanded in a low, calm voice. The dog instantly stopped his low, rumbling growl. Max returned directly to Marvin's side. He pressed his dark shoulder against his handler's left leg, resuming a passive but highly observant guard position. 2 federal agents grabbed Hodges by his heavy shoulders. They hauled him roughly off the wet, dirty floor. The sheriff groaned heavily as they twisted his arms behind his back. The steel cuffs snapped closed tightly around his wrists. They marched him toward the front door. Hodges kept his head down. He refused to look at the waitress he had bullied. He refused to look at the federal judge he had threatened. The arrogant man walked out completely broken, permanently stripped of his badge and his false power. The diner suddenly felt entirely empty, even with the remaining FBI agents inside. The oppressive weight of the sheriff's presence vanished into the night. Clara, the terrified waitress, slowly lowered her hands from her pale face. She let out a long, shaking breath of pure relief. She leaned against the back counter, finally realizing she was entirely safe. The old man in the back booth sat up straight again, watching the incredible scene in quiet awe. Judge Vance turned her attention directly to Marvin. She studied his calm, stoic posture. She noted the incredible discipline of his military dog. The cold, authoritative expression on her face softened slightly. She saw the military bearing, the quiet confidence, and the fierce loyalty of the animal standing beside him. The FBI tactical team waited exactly 3 miles down the road, Vance said. She walked closer to him. They listened to the live audio feed. They mobilized the very second the sheriff raised his voice. But they would not have reached those doors in time. You prevented a severe physical injury tonight. I am deeply grateful for your immediate and decisive intervention. Marvin gave a polite, short nod. He kept his hands relaxed in his jacket pockets. I just did what was necessary, ma'am. He crossed a serious line. Nobody should ever have to face that kind of blind bullying alone. Vance reached into her purse. She pulled out a crisp, white business card featuring a gold seal. She held it out to him. "My office is always open. If you ever need a character reference, legal assistance, or simply a favor, call this number. The Department of Justice owes you a massive debt of gratitude." Marvin accepted the card. He glanced at the gold seal printed on the heavy paper, then slid it carefully into his front pocket. "Have a safe night, Your Honor." He turned away from the judge and walked back to his dark corner booth. He picked up his leather wallet from the table. He pulled a $20 bill from the fold and placed it neatly next to his empty white coffee mug. "Keep the change," Marvin called out to Clara. He offered her a small, reassuring smile. The coffee was very good. Clara nodded back, her eyes still wide with absolute amazement. "Thank you. Thank you for everything you did." Marvin turned and walked toward the glass exit door. Max stayed perfectly in step beside him, moving silently like a shadow. They stepped out into the cool, rainy night. The diner parking lot flashed brilliantly with bright red and blue emergency lights. Several black federal vehicles blocked the entire highway. The FBI agent stepped aside respectfully, creating a clear path to let the quiet man and his dog pass through the scene. Marvin climbed into his old truck. Max jumped into the passenger seat, settling down comfortably on the worn fabric. Marvin started the engine. The low rumble of the motor blended with the steady sound of the falling rain. He put the truck in gear and pulled out of the bright parking lot. He drove back onto the dark, wet Georgia highway, disappearing into the night exactly as quietly as he had arrived. Sometimes the loudest person in the room is the weakest, and the quietest person holds the most power. This story reminds us that true authority does not come from a badge or a uniform, but from integrity, discipline, and the courage to stand up for what is right. Marvin and his loyal dog Max did not ask for a fight, but they did not hesitate to protect a stranger when the line was crossed. Judge Eleanor Vance proved that real power remains calm under pressure, letting the truth speak for itself. I truly believe that we all face moments where we must choose between staying silent and standing up against bullying. We might not have a trained military dog by our side, but we all have a voice. It takes courage to be the shield for someone else, and justice requires ordinary people to choose bravery over comfort. May God bless you with the strength to stand tall in the face of injustice, the wisdom to remain calm in the storms of life, and the bravery to protect those who need it. If you believe in the power of justice and standing up for others, type Amen in the comments below. If this story inspired you today, please share it with your friends and family. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and do not forget to subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories of courage and humanity. I will see you in the next one.